After dedicating her entire life to her two ungrateful children, Juliet Moore, a 64-year-old self-made businesswoman, accidentally overhears a call that shatters her heart. Her daughter Emma coldly says she won't invite her to the wedding because she's an embarrassment. The same daughter Juliet raised alone after her husband's death, the one whose education, luxury apartment, and lifestyle Juliet had paid for, now wanted to erase her. But Juliet wasn't the fragile old woman they thought. She was the woman who had turned a $5,000 loan into a real estate empire. So instead of tears, she poured herself a glass of wine and began to plan. She discovered she had transferred nearly 3 million pesos to her children in 5 years. Money they used to live like millionaires while treating her like a burden. So she orchestrated the perfect revenge. Pretending to be weak, she agreed to fund Emma's extravagant wedding, only to expose her lies to her fiancé's family and pit her greedy siblings against each other. Then came the family meeting, a night her children would never forget. In front of everyone, Juliet played the recording of Emma mocking her, revealed every peso she'd given them, and calmly announced that all bank accounts and properties were being reclaimed under her name. Their credit cards cancelled, their allowances gone, their inheritance redirected to the only person who had shown her real love, her granddaughter Julia. As Emma's fake world collapsed and Michael's marriage fell apart, Juliet moved into a quiet lakeside apartment, finally free. Her daughter lost her fiancé, her son lost his comfort, but Juliet gained something priceless: dignity and peace. 2 years later, her son called with trembling regret, admitting that without her money, he had finally found himself. Juliet didn't need his apology. She had already won. Because in the end, Juliet's story isn't about revenge. It's about awakening. She proved that true love cannot be bought, and that sometimes a mother must destroy everything she built to rebuild herself. The phone slipped from my hands when I heard my own daughter, Emma, say those words that shattered my heart in two. Of course I'm not inviting my mother. Can you imagine the embarrassment she'd cause in front of Adrian's family? Her voice sounded so cold, so calculated, as if she were talking about getting rid of an old piece of furniture that no longer served her. I stood there frozen in the hallway of my own house, the phone receiver on the floor, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would explode. 64 years of life, 8 years of widowhood, and 38 years of being that girl's mother, only to discover that she saw me as a source of shame. The conversation continued on the other end of the line. Emma was talking to someone, probably Maria, my daughter-in-law, that second-rate influencer who loves posting pictures of the house I bought for my son Michael. You know how Mom is. George will think we're a family of. Well, you know what I mean. Adrian is already being generous enough by accepting where we come from. Where we come from. Had she forgotten that because of where we came from, she was able to study architecture at the most expensive university in the country? That it was thanks to my decades of hard work, waking up at 5 in the morning, building my little real estate empire brick by brick, that she now had the luxury of choosing her clients? My legs trembled, and I had to lean against the wall. The wallpaper Emma herself had chosen last year when I redecorated her house, to make it look more modern, Mom, now felt like a mockery. Everything in that house screamed of the money I had earned with my own hands, the same money she spent like water. And besides, Emma continued, you know Mom never knows how to behave. She'll show up in one of those hideous dresses she buys at the market, she'll talk too loud, and she'll tell embarrassing childhood stories. Emma let out a nervous laugh that made my blood run cold. Adrian's family is very refined. His brother George is a diplomat. His mother was Miss Universe in the 80s. Can you imagine my mom trying to talk to those people? The receiver was still on the floor, but I couldn't move. Each word pierced my chest like a knife. This was the same little girl who used to crawl into my bed when she had nightmares. The same girl who cried in my arms when other kids mocked her worn-out shoes. The same child who swore that when she grew up, she would always take care of me. Michael agrees with me, Emma continued. He also thinks it's better if Mom doesn't come. It's already going to be awkward enough to explain why Dad isn't here. We don't need more drama. Michael, my baby, The son I carried in my arms for 2 years because he was sickly. The one whose law degree I paid for and to whom I gave his first apartment when he married Maria. Both of them, my 2 children, had decided that I was an embarrassment. Emma's laughter echoed through the empty house. The best part is she probably won't even notice. Lately she's been so forgetful, so, old. She'll probably forget there's even a wedding. That was the moment something inside me broke completely. It wasn't just the exclusion. It wasn't just the shame. It was the underestimation. They thought I was a senile old fool they could manipulate at will. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. I wasn't the confused old lady they believed me to be. I was Julia Morales, the woman who turned a small 5,000 peso loan into a real estate empire of 20 properties. The same woman who raised 2 children alone after their father died, working 18-hour days so they would never lack a thing. I carefully hung up the phone, as if it were made of glass. My mind was already working at full speed, like in the old days when I had to solve financial crises or negotiate with contractors who thought they could fool me because I was a woman. I had learned long ago that revenge is best served cold, and that patience is the most powerful weapon a clever woman can have. I went to my study, that little sanctuary filled with filing cabinets and contracts that my children had always avoided like the plague. "Mom's boring papers," Emma used to say when she was little. How ironic that those boring papers were exactly what had financed her luxuries her entire life. I turned on my computer and began reviewing all the transfers I had made over the last 5 years. Emma. Luxury apartment in Chelsea. £20,000. Michael, suburban home in Surrey. £30,000. Emma again, BMW coupe. £15,000. Michael, wedding expenses with Maria. £10,000. Emma, master's degree in Europe. £25,000. The list was endless. Each transfer came with a sweet, manipulative justification. "Mom, it's an investment in my future. Maria's pregnant and we need more space. It's just a loan. I'll pay you back in 6 months." Loans that were never repaid. Investments that benefited only them. As I reviewed the numbers, I remembered exactly how it had all begun. It was 3 years after my husband Robert died. I was devastated, lost, trying to navigate the world alone for the first time in my life. Emma came home crying. "Mom, I've been offered an incredible job opportunity, but I need to look more professional. Could you lend me a little money to update my wardrobe?" A small loan. 30,000 pesos for clothes. But I said yes because seeing her cry tore me apart. Because I wanted her to have the opportunities one never did. That was my first mistake. Confusing love with money. Then it was Michael's turn. "Mom, Maria and I want to start a family, but our apartment is too small. Could you help us with the down payment?" "Just the down payment. We'll cover the rest." Course I agreed. 6 months later they came back. "The monthly payments are too high, and Maria had to quit her job because of the pregnancy." In the end I paid for the entire house. The pattern was always the same. They'd show up with a sad story, an urgent need, a promise of independence. "This is the last time, Mom. After this we won't bother you again. Just until we're stable." Sweet lies wrapped in kisses on the cheek and carefully timed hugs. But I had been foolish, confusing their need for my money with real affection. I thought I was a generous mother, when in reality I was nothing more than an emotional ATM. They came, pressed the right buttons, and I spit out cash. The most painful revelation came when I found the credit card statements I'd opened under their names. Emma had spent £2,500 last month. Michael £2,000. On fine restaurants, designer clothes, weekend getaways. Living like millionaires on my money while I still bought my clothes at the market and cooked at home to save. Then the phone rang. It was Emma. "Hi, Mom. How are you?" Her voice was suddenly sweet, affectionate, completely different from the one she had used an hour earlier when she spoke of me as if I were a burden. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something important. Can you come over tomorrow? It's about the wedding." "Of course, sweetheart. I'll come tomorrow," I replied in the sweetest voice I could fake, But inside, a cold smile was already forming on my lips. I knew exactly what Emma wanted to discuss with me. It wasn't my presence at her wedding. It was my money to fund it. That night I couldn't sleep. I stayed awake until 3 in the morning, reviewing every document, every contract, every bank transfer. My mind worked like a calculator, summing up years of misinterpreted generosity and unreciprocated love, but also planning. Because if there's one thing I'd learned in decades as a businesswoman, it's that information is power, and I had a lot of it. The next morning, I arrived at Emma's house at exactly 10 o'clock, as we'd agreed. I wore my simplest dress, the one she hated most, and carried my worn-out faux leather purse. I wanted to look exactly like the harmless old lady they thought I was. Emma greeted me with a hug that smelled of expensive perfume and lies. "Mom, I'm so glad you came. Sit down. I made you some coffee." She poured it into one of the fine porcelain cups I had given her for her birthday, part of a set that cost more than a secretary's monthly salary. Everything in her house screamed luxury. The Italian furniture, the enormous flat-screen TV, the artwork on the walls, all paid for with my money, turned into decorative trophies to impress strangers. "Look, Mom," Emma began, sitting in front of me and crossing her legs with rehearsed elegance. "I wanted to talk to you about the wedding. You know Adrian, and I want something very special, very elegant. His family is very distinguished." There was again that word. Distinguished. As if I were some second-class product that needed to be hidden so as not to ruin her premium image. I nodded, pretending to smile the way she expected me to. "The problem," she continued, "is that the costs have gotten much higher than we expected. The venue we want costs 200,000 pesos just for the rental. Then there's the catering, the flowers, the music, the photographer." Emma paused dramatically, as if the numbers were causing her great distress. "In total, we're talking about almost 800,000 pesos. 800,000 pesos. More money than many families see in a lifetime." Emma said it like it was a perfectly reasonable amount for a 6-hour party. I took a sip of coffee and kept my face neutral. "Adrian has put in his share, of course," she added quickly. "And his family is contributing too. But we still need—" She made another calculated pause. "We need you to cover the difference. It's about 400,000 pesos. 400,000 pesos, said so casually, as if she were asking to borrow 20. Emma fiddled with her engagement ring, the same nervous gesture she'd had since childhood whenever she lied. And she was lying. I knew perfectly well that Adrian's family hadn't contributed a single cent. I knew because I had checked. "I know it's a lot of money, Mom," she said, "but think of it as an investment in my future. Adrian has important connections. This marriage could open a lot of doors for my career." Her voice turned syrupy, manipulative. "It'll be the last big favor I ever ask. After this, we'll be completely independent." The last time. How many times had I heard that line? It was like a broken record. Every time they needed money. Asterisk, "The last time I'll bother you, Mom. After this, we won't need anything else. It's just one final investment in our future." Asterisk. Sweet lies that I had swallowed again and again, like a fool addicted to the illusion of being needed. "And Mom." Emma leaned forward and took my hands, her perfectly manicured fingers pressing against mine. "I know we haven't officially invited you yet, but that's because we want to surprise you. The truth is, we're planning something very intimate, very family-oriented." More lies. I had already seen the guest list lying on her coffee table. 250 people. Politicians, businessmen, influencers, all the important people Emma needed to build her image as a successful woman. But her own mother wasn't on that list. "I just need you to confirm the money so I can book everything. The vendors are waiting," she said, squeezing my hands and pretending to look vulnerable. "I trust you, Mom. You've always been there for me." I had always been there. To pay for her whims, to fund her dreams, to clean up her financial messes. But when I needed emotional support, when I was lonely after Robert's death, when Sundays stretched endlessly in this empty house, they weren't there. "Of course, sweetheart," I said with the same maternal smile I had perfected over the years. You know I'll always support you in everything." Emma sighed in relief, as if she'd been holding her breath. She had no idea that I already knew everything. "You're the best mom in the world," she said, kissing my cheek with those lips that tasted of falsehood. "I promise this wedding will be perfect. Adrian is so grateful to you. He always says how lucky he is to have such a generous mother-in-law." Adrian, the perfect fiancé, who had never said more than 5 words to me in the 2 years he'd been dating my daughter. The same man who always looked uncomfortable whenever I visited, as if my presence polluted the sophisticated atmosphere they'd built. But, of course, my money didn't pollute anything. That they welcomed with open arms. When I left Emma's house, I drove straight to the office of William, my accountant, one of the few real friends I had left. William had been Robert's right hand in business, and after his death, he became my most trusted advisor. He was one of the few men I'd ever met who didn't underestimate me for being a woman. "Julia, what a surprise to see you here. Is everything all right?" William stood up from his desk with a genuine smile, the kind of smile I hadn't received at home in years. His office smelled like coffee and old paper, a scent that comforted me because it reminded me of the days when Robert and I were building our little empire together. "William, I need you to do me a very special favor," I said. "I want to review exactly how much money I've transferred to my children over the last 5 years. Every single penny." I sat across from him, my hands folded neatly on my lap, like the executive I had been for decades. William frowned slightly. "Are you sure, Julia? Those numbers might be shocking." He knew my family well. He had been a silent witness to every one of their requests for money, every so-called emergency, that inevitably became my responsibility. "I'm more than sure," I said firmly. "I want exact numbers, dates, details, and I want you to tell me what my financial situation would be if I stopped supporting them completely." My voice sounded sharp, professional. It had been years since I'd heard myself like that. William worked for 2 hours straight, typing, checking transactions, calculating totals. I sat there watching as years of generosity turned into cold, brutal figures. When he finished, he handed me a single sheet of paper, and the numbers took my breath away. "In 5 years, Julia," he said softly, "you've transferred 2,800,000 pesos to Emma and Michael. That's not counting the properties in their names, the credit cards you pay every month, or the life insurance policies where they're the beneficiaries." William looked at me with a mix of compassion and admiration. "You're an incredibly generous woman." Generous. What a beautiful word to describe what had really been systematic stupidity. 2.8 million pesos. More money than most people earn in an entire lifetime. And I had given it away to 2 people who now saw me as an embarrassment. "Now tell me, William," I asked, "if I completely cut them off financially, how long do you think they could sustain themselves?" It was a rhetorical question. We both knew the answer. "Emma spends more than she earns every month," he said. "Her work as an architect gives her enough to live modestly, but not to maintain the lifestyle she has. Michael is doing slightly better, but with the mortgage, Maria's expenses, and their luxuries, I'd say 3 months at most before they're in serious trouble." 3 months. That's how long their pride, their arrogance, their supposed independence would last without my money. It was valuable information but also devastating. I had created 2 financial monsters who didn't know how to live without draining my bank account. That night, alone in my house, I made a decision that would change everything. I poured myself a glass of wine, the expensive one Emma had given me for my birthday, paid for with my money of course, and sat in my favorite armchair, the same one where Robert used to read the financial news aloud, where we had planned every investment, every strategic move. I took out my phone and dialed George's number. Adrian's brother. I had done my research. He was a diplomat, a serious and respectable man. If Emma was so ashamed of me, it was time she learned exactly who was funding her fiancé's wedding. "Good evening, George. This is Julia Morales, Emma's mother. Sorry to call you so late, but I need to talk to you about something important regarding your brother's wedding." George's voice sounded surprised but polite. "Of course, Mrs. Morales. How can I help you?" George, I said sweetly, I just need to clarify a few things about the wedding expenses. My daughter told me that your family is contributing financially, but I believe there might be some misunderstanding. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. My voice was gentle, innocent, like that of a confused old lady just trying to avoid trouble. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Mrs. Morales, George said finally, I'm afraid I don't understand. We haven't agreed to make any financial contribution. Adrian told us that you and Emma had everything covered. His voice betrayed genuine confusion. Perfect. Emma had lied about that too. Oh, how strange, I said sweetly. Well, don't worry, George. I'll take care of all the expenses. As always. I let that last phrase hang in the air. An accidental confession. As always. George now sounded intrigued. Forgive my curiosity, Mrs. Morales, but have you been supporting Emma financially for a long time? There was my opportunity. Well, I said softly, a mother does what she has to do for her children, right? Emma has faced a few financial challenges. Her apartment, her car, her studies in Europe. We've managed all that within the family. Paused strategically. But don't worry, I have enough properties to cover any expense. That word, properties, always got people's attention. George was a diplomat. He understood the weight of real estate. How generous of you, Mrs. Morales, he said. Adrian never mentioned that Emma was having financial difficulties. Oh, Emma is very proud, I replied. She doesn't like people to know she depends on her mother. But between us, George, she couldn't maintain her lifestyle without my help. Every word was a ticking time bomb, one Emma would never see coming. After hanging up, I immediately dialed Michael's number. It was time to test my younger son's loyalty, the one who had always been softer, more impressionable than Emma. If there was even a small chance that one of my children could still be saved, it was him. Hi, Mom. Is everything okay? It's pretty late. Michael's voice sounded sleepy, but also nervous. No doubt Emma had already told him about our little conversation regarding the money. Michael, sweetheart, I need to talk to you about something very serious, I said. It's about your sister's wedding. I settled deeper into the armchair, ready for the performance of my life. Emma asked me for money for the wedding, a lot of money. But something's been bothering me. What is it, Mom? Michael's tone shifted. He was wide awake now. Well, I said slowly, lately I've been thinking a lot about my future, about what will happen to me when I'm older. You all have your own lives now, your own families, I said, letting my voice tremble just enough, a perfect imitation of a fragile confession. Mom, what are you talking about? You're perfectly fine, said Michael, but I could hear the discomfort in his tone. He already knew exactly where this conversation was heading. Yes, I'm fine now, I replied softly. But what will happen in 5 years? In 10? I don't want to be a burden to you. I paused, letting the silence linger like bait. I've been thinking about selling a few properties and moving somewhere smaller, something I can manage on my own. The silence on the other end was deafening. Michael was calculating, if I sold the properties, if I downsized, if I became financially independent, their extra income would vanish. No more easy loans, no more houses waiting to be inherited, no more safety net called Mom. Mom, don't say things like that. We'd never abandon you. You're part of our family, he stammered. Sweet lies wrapped in barely concealed panic. Oh, Michael, that's so nice to hear, I said warmly. Because honestly, sometimes I feel like I'm just in the way. Like with Emma's wedding. I left the sentence unfinished, dangling like bait. What about Emma's wedding? He tried to sound casual, but I knew that tone. It was the same one he used as a child when he'd broken something and was about to lie about it. Well, I sighed. Emma told me they're having something very small, very intimate. Only the most important people. And I understand, of course. At my age, I don't really fit into those elegant celebrations anymore. My voice was the perfect mix of maternal guilt and quiet martyrdom. Michael swallowed audibly. Mom, I didn't know Emma said that to you. There must be a misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding, sweetheart. Emma was very clear. She said Adrian's family is very refined and distinguished, and that I'm just an old woman who doesn't know how to behave in society. Every word was a dagger aimed straight at his conscience. Mom, that's not true. He stopped. He couldn't finish the sentence without lying, and we both knew it. It's all right, Michael, I said softly. I understand. You've both grown, moved up in the world. It's only natural that you'd be embarrassed by your mother who comes from the market. I paused deliberately. I just hope that when I move and sell everything, you'll understand it's because I want to give you space to shine, without my shadow. The line went silent for nearly a minute. Michael was processing what I just said, realizing that if I sold my properties and cut financial ties, they'd actually have to live on their own means. Mom, don't make any sudden decisions, he said finally, his voice shaking. Let me talk to Emma. There must be some big misunderstanding. I could hear Maria's voice in the background, high-pitched and worried, asking what was going on. I promise we'll fix this, he said. I don't want you two fighting because of me, sweetheart, I said gently. If Emma thinks it's better that I don't go, I'll respect her decision. After all, it's her special day. My tone was pure maternal resignation, but inside I was smiling. Michael was panicking, and that meant my plan was working. Mom, we never wanted to hurt you. Let me talk to Emma tomorrow morning. Don't do anything until we talk, okay? Now his voice sounded desperate. All right, darling, I said sweetly. But I've already made an important decision. I told Emma today that I'll give her the money for her wedding. 400,000 pesos. It'll be my farewell gift before I simplify my life. The lie slipped from my lips like poisoned honey. The silence that followed was thunderous. Michael was processing what that meant. Emma had asked me for 400,000 pesos behind his back. The siblings had always competed for my money, but over time they'd learned to coordinate to maximize their profits. Now that alliance was cracking. 400,000 pesos, he finally said, his tone sharp with disbelief. Emma asked you for that much? Yes, I said casually. For the venue, the catering, the flowers. She said it's going to be a very elegant wedding. I suppose since you're already married, you don't need anything, right? Another deliberate lie. Michael and Maria were always asking for something. House renovations, vacations, Maria's new car. Mom, we have expenses too, he said quickly. Maria's pregnant again, and we'll need to expand the house. Michael took the bait perfectly. Maria's pregnant. Oh, what wonderful news! I exclaimed, feigning surprise and joy, though I knew perfectly well it was a lie. Maria had posted photos drinking wine on social media just last week. Of course I'll help you with that too, I said sweetly. After all, you two still include me in your lives. That last sentence was the final blow. Michael understood the message perfectly. Emma got money but excluded me. He included me but got nothing. That equation was suddenly very inconvenient for him. I hung up the phone feeling a satisfaction I hadn't experienced in years. For the first time in a long time I had the control. My children had spent their lives manipulating me, but they'd forgotten one crucial fact. I'd been a businesswoman long before I became a mother. I knew every negotiation tactic, every psychological strategy, every pressure point. The next morning the show began. At 7 a.m., Emma called, hysterical. Mom, what did you say to Michael? He's furious with me. He says I'm selfish and that I'm excluding him from everything. Good morning, sweetheart, I said with calm sweetness. I don't understand why he's upset. I only told him about your wedding. How beautiful it's going to be. You told him I asked you for 400,000 pesos and that I'm leaving him out of the wedding. Emma's voice was cracking, something rare for her. She was always calculated, always composed. Well, it's true, isn't it? You did ask me for that money yesterday. I paused, letting the innocence drip from my tone. And about Michael, well, he asked if he was invited and I told him it was just for the most important people. I thought he already knew. Emma cursed under her breath. Mom, Michael is my brother. Of course he's invited to the wedding. Oh, how nice to hear that. So when you said important people, you were referring just to me then. I understand. My voice radiated wounded innocence. That's not what I meant, Mom. Of course you're important, it's just that. Emma stopped cold, unable to explain why her own mother wasn't important enough to attend her wedding. It's all right, sweetheart. Got the message. That's why I decided to simplify my life. Yesterday I spoke with a real estate agent about selling some properties. If you no longer need me as a mother, at least I won't be a financial burden. I let the words seep into her mind like acid. You're selling properties. Which ones? Emma's voice lost all pretense. Now it was pure financial panic. Well, first the beach house, then the downtown apartments. George gave me excellent advice yesterday about how to liquidate assets intelligently. I mentioned George casually, as if it were just a passing conversation. You spoke to George, Adrian's brother? Emma's voice shot up an octave. She sounded on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Yes, such a polite young man. He explained that your fiancé's family isn't contributing financially to the wedding, that Adrian told them you and I had everything under control. Then I paused, deliberately, letting the silence burn through the phone. He asked a lot about my properties, I said, sipping my coffee with calculated calm. He seemed very impressed. Emma hung up without saying goodbye. I knew she was running straight to call Adrian, probably to ask what exactly he had told his family about the Morales financial situation. For the next 3 days my phone didn't stop ringing. It was like watching domino pieces fall one by one. First Michael called, trying to convince me to come over for lunch with him and Maria, to clear things up. Then Emma, suddenly speaking in a syrupy, unrecognizable tone, invited me for coffee to plan the wedding details together. After that, Michael again, offering to drive me to the doctor because he thought I sounded stressed lately. But the most revealing call came on Thursday night. It was Julia, my 16-year-old granddaughter, Michael and Maria's daughter. Her voice sounded different, more mature than usual. Grandma, can I come see you tomorrow after school? I need to talk to you. Julia had always been special, the only one in this family who seemed to have inherited my business instinct and my ability to see through lies. Of course, sweetheart. Come whenever you want. Julia was my weakness, the only person in this entire family who loved me without any economic conditions attached. The next day, she arrived in her school uniform, her expression serious, almost defiant, a mirror of myself at that age. She sat down in the kitchen, refused the juice I offered, and went straight to the point. Grandma, Dad and Mom have been talking about you a lot lately. They argue in low voices and stop whenever I walk into the room. Julia had Robert's eyes that missed nothing. Mom's been obsessed with checking the bank accounts, and Dad looks really stressed. And what do you think about all of that, sweetheart? I asked, genuinely curious about the only honest perspective left in this family. I think they're scared, she said, locking her gaze on mine. Scared that you'll stop supporting them. And honestly, Grandma, I think it's about time. Her words hit me harder than all the desperate calls I'd received that week. Here was a 16-year-old girl who understood perfectly the toxic dynamic I had been feeding for years. Grandma, I've watched this family my whole life, she continued. I've seen how Dad and Aunt Emma constantly ask you for money, how Mom plans expensive purchases right before visiting you, how everyone acts differently when they need something. Julia spoke with a heartbreaking clarity and maturity far beyond her years. And I've also seen how you give them everything, and never ask for anything in return. That's what mothers do, Julia. What grandmothers do, I said weakly, trying to justify decades of behavior I already knew was wrong. No, Grandma. A mother teaches her children to be independent. A grandmother loves them, but doesn't turn them into parasites. Julia took my hands in hers. Mom told me yesterday that if you sell your properties, we'll have to move to a smaller place. Like it's some tragedy that we'd have to live on what Dad actually earns. Her brutal honesty left me speechless. I had raised 2 children who didn't understand the value of money because they had never needed to earn it. And now they were raising their children with the same entitlement and dependency. "Julia, did you know Emma didn't invite me to her wedding?" I asked, needing to know how deep the family conspiracy went. Julia nodded sadly. "Mom told me like it was no big deal. She said Aunt Emma wanted an elegant wedding and that you wouldn't fit in. I asked her how someone could exclude their own mother, and she said I wouldn't understand because I'm too young." Julia squeezed my hands. "But I do understand, Grandma," she said firmly. "They're ashamed of you because you're real, because you worked hard, because you don't pretend to be something you're not." At that moment, watching my granddaughter defend my dignity while my own children trampled it, I made my final decision. Julia was the only one who deserved my inheritance, the only one who had inherited my true values. "Julia, I need your help with something very important," I said in a conspiratorial tone. "But it's going to require you to keep a few secrets, even from your parents." Her eyes widened with curiosity. "What do you need, Grandma?" "I need you to help me organize a family meeting," I said. "I want everyone here on Saturday night. Tell them I have something very important to announce about my future." A cold smile spread across my face, one I hadn't felt in years. "And bring your phone," I added, "so you can record everything that's about to happen." Julia looked at me with a mixture of admiration and worry. "Grandma, what are you planning?" "Justice, my love," I said calmly. "After 64 years of life, I'm finally going to serve a plate of justice, ice cold." I took her hands gently. "And you're going to be the witness to how a woman takes back her dignity." That night, after Julia left, I sat in my study and finished preparing all the documents. Bank transfers, account statements, screenshots of messages, call recordings, everything meticulously organized in folders labeled with each of my children's names. Saturday would be the day the Morales family finally learned who had really been in control of the money all along. Saturday night, they all arrived at my house exactly at 8 o'clock, just as I'd asked. Emma came first, elegant, nervous, carrying an expensive bouquet probably bought with my own money. Michael and Maria arrived 5 minutes later, with Julia walking behind them, her phone discreetly ready in her pocket. "Mom, it's so nice that you brought us all together," Emma said, kissing my cheek with those well-rehearsed lying lips. "It's been ages since we've had a family dinner." "Yes," I replied, motioning them to sit in the living room. "I needed to talk to all of you about some important decisions I've made." I had prepared coffee and cookies, like in the old days when we were still a real family. Maria sat scrolling through her phone. Michael kept fidgeting with his watch, visibly anxious. Emma smiled too much, that forced smile she wore whenever she wanted something. Only Julia looked calm, sitting quietly in the corner armchair, watching everything with those sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "Well," I began, "as you know, I've been thinking a lot about my future lately, about what will happen to me when I'm older." I poured coffee into the cups Emma had chosen for me last year. "And I've also been thinking about all of you, about your lives and everything you've accomplished." Emma leaned forward. "Mom, you're perfectly fine. You don't need to worry about things like that yet." "Of course I do, Emma. At my age, one has to be realistic." I took a slow sip of coffee, savoring the moment. "That's why I've made some very important decisions about my estate." The air in the room grew heavy. Michael stopped fiddling with his watch. Maria lifted her eyes from her phone. Emma's smile remained frozen, but I saw the muscles in her neck tighten. "First, I want to tell you about a very interesting conversation I had with George, Adrian's brother." I looked directly at Emma, who instantly went pale. "It turns out he had no idea that you were expecting his family to make any financial contribution to the wedding." "Mom, that was a misunderstanding," Emma blurted out, but I raised my hand to silence her. "Let me finish, sweetheart. George was very intrigued when I told him about all the properties I own, about how I've been supporting our family for years." I smiled sweetly. He thought it was very generous of me to keep maintaining adult children with full-time careers. Mom, we're not freeloaders, Michael said, clearing his throat nervously. We have jobs, our own income. Really, Michael? I replied, opening the first folder I had prepared. According to my records, in the last 5 years, I've transferred 1,200,000 pesos to you. Your salary as a lawyer is 40,000 pesos a month. Without my help, you couldn't even afford the mortgage on your house. Michael went silent. Maria looked at him, her expression a mix of panic and reproach. Clearly, she had never known the exact numbers of their financial dependence. And you, Emma, I continued, pulling out the second folder. In that same period, you've received 1,600,000 pesos. Your job as an architect allows you to live modestly, but not to afford an apartment in Polanco, a BMW, or trips to Europe. Emma tried to keep her composure. Mom, those were loans. Investments in our future. Loans. I let out a short, bitter laugh. Then show me one document where repayment terms were established. Just one piece of paper acknowledging that you owe me money. Silence. Because no such documents existed. They had never planned to pay me back. Not once. But the most interesting part, I continued, is that during all these years in which I've given you millions of pesos, both of you have decided that I'm not good enough to be part of your important lives. I took out my phone and played the recording. Emma's voice filled the room. Of course I'm not inviting my mother. Can you imagine the embarrassment she'd cause in front of Adrian's family? Emma shot to her feet like she'd been electrocuted. Mom, did you record that conversation? I didn't record anything, Emma. You simply forgot to hang up the phone when you were talking to Maria. I lied with icy calm. For 20 minutes, I listened to you talk about me like I was a shameful burden. Michael turned toward her. Emma, is that true? Did you really say that? It's not what it sounds like, she stammered. I was stressed, worried about the wedding. Her polished elegance was crumbling fast. You were worried about impressing your fiancé's family, I said sharply. A family, by the way, that isn't contributing a single peso to your 800,000 peso wedding. A wedding I am fully financing, even though I'm not invited. Maria finally spoke, her voice small and trembling. Mother-in-law, I'm sure there's some explanation. The explanation is simple, Maria. I cut her off. My children have lived like millionaires with my money, and yet they're ashamed of the woman who worked to give it to them. I stood up, feeling an energy I hadn't felt in years. That's why I've made final decisions about my future, and yours. Effective immediately. All credit cards in your names are cancelled. All monthly transfers are permanently suspended. And all properties registered under your names will return to my control. My voice was firm as steel, each word calculated for maximum impact. Emma jumped to her feet. Mom, you can't do that. I have bills, contracts, payments scheduled. Of course I can, Emma. They're my cards, my money, my properties. I only put them under your names for tax convenience, but legally they're still mine. I pulled out a thick folder filled with legal documents. William has already prepared all the paperwork. It goes into effect on Monday morning. Michael looked crushed. Mom, we have a mortgage. Juana's expenses. Our whole life. The life I built for you, Michael, I said coldly. With my work, my money, and my sacrifice. Now you'll have to learn to build your own, with your own resources. Maria was crying quietly. Emma paced the room like a trapped animal. Michael sat with his head in his hands. Only Julia remained calm, discreetly recording everything from the corner. This is emotional blackmail, Emma shouted suddenly. You're punishing us for a private conversation. Emotional blackmail. My laughter came out cold and sharp. Emma, you're planning to get married with my money at a wedding I'm not even invited to. And I'm the manipulator? Adrian's going to cancel everything, she cried. His family will think we're con artists. Maybe you should have thought of that before calling me an embarrassment in front of that same family, I said, sitting back down, savoring every second of her unraveling. But don't worry, Emma, I said calmly. I have a proposal. They all looked at me. Desperate, hopeful. You can keep the 400,000 pesos for the wedding, on one condition. I leaned forward. I sit at the main table. You introduce me proudly as your hard-working mother, the woman who financed your education, and you publicly thank me for making your luxurious life possible. Emma went pale. I can't do that. Adrian's family. Then there's no money. And without money, there's no wedding. Shrug. You decide what matters more, your fake image or your marriage. Michael tried one last time. Mom, please think about this. We're your family, your only children. My only children who are ashamed of me, who lie to me, who use me like an ATM. I stood and walked toward Julia. But I'm not completely cruel, I said softly. Julia isn't to blame for having parasitic parents. I placed a hand on my granddaughter's shoulder. Julia, you remain my universal heir. When I die, everything will be yours. And when you turn 18, you'll also have access to the educational fund I've created just for you. Julia wrapped her arms around me tightly. Thank you, Grandma. And for the first time in years I felt what power truly was. Not in money, not in control, but in dignity finally reclaimed. But I just want you to be happy, Michael said quietly. I will be happy, sweetheart, for the first time in years. I looked at my children, who stared back at me with a mix of shock and desperation. I'm moving next week, I continued calmly. I bought a beautiful apartment in Cuernavaca, near the lake. Julia can visit me whenever she wants. You're moving. Michael looked lost. Yes, I said. And I'm selling this house. I already have a buyer. I smiled, a genuine smile this time. A young couple who will turn it into a home filled with real love. Emma collapsed onto the couch. Mom, you can't destroy our family like this. I didn't destroy anything, Emma. You destroyed this family the moment you decided my money was worth more than my presence. I walked to the door. This meeting is over. You have until Wednesday to collect your things from my house. 3 months later, I was sitting on the terrace of my new apartment, sipping coffee while watching the sunrise over the lake. Every weekend, Julia came to visit, telling me about her university plans and her dream of studying business administration. She was the only one who had inherited my entrepreneurial spirit. Emma cancelled the wedding. Adrian left her. Once he found out the truth about her financial situation, the illusion vanished. Michael and Maria had to sell their house and move into a small apartment. Both took part-time jobs to survive. They never apologized, never acknowledged their mistakes, but they also never asked me for money again. I found peace in silence. In mornings by the lake. In afternoons spent reading books I'd ignored for years. In evenings planning Julia's business future. I had learned the most important lesson of my life. That true love cannot be bought with money, and that dignity has no price. My children had chosen money over love. I had chosen peace over their parasitism, and I never looked back. 2 years later, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, I received an unexpected call. I was watering my plants on the terrace when the phone rang. The name on the screen surprised me, Michael. Hello, Mom. His voice sounded different, older, tired. I know I have no right to call you after all this time, he said softly, but I needed to talk to you. I sat down in my favorite chair, the one I'd bought with my own savings, without asking anyone's permission. Go ahead, Michael. Mom. Maria and I are getting a divorce. His voice broke slightly. It turns out that once your money was gone, she realized she never loved the man I really am, only the lifestyle you provided. I didn't feel satisfaction nor sadness, only a strange sense of cosmic inevitability. I'm sorry, Michael. No, you're not, Mom. And you're right not to be. He paused. These last 2 years have been the hardest of my life, but also the most honest. For the first time in decades, he said. He'd had to face who he truly was, without my money as a shield. I could hear the ambient noise of a cafe behind him. He was probably sitting there, mustering the courage for this call. "And who are you, Michael?" asked, genuinely curious. "I'm a mediocre lawyer who spent years feeling entitled to his mother's money," he confessed. "I'm a father who taught his daughter that money is asked for, not earned. I'm a man who was ashamed of the hardest working woman he's ever known. I'm a coward who let his sister mistreat you because it was convenient for me." His words cut like knives, but they finally cut in the right direction. "Mom, I'm not calling to ask for money," he continued. "I'm not even calling to ask for forgiveness, because I know I don't deserve it. I'm calling to tell you that I finally understand what you did to us." He took a deep breath. "You forced us to grow up." I stayed silent, processing his words. Outside, an elderly couple walked hand in hand along the lakeshore. I'd been seeing them for 2 years every afternoon, and I often wondered if that was what real love looked like. "How's Julia?" I asked, the only question that truly mattered to me. "She's amazing," Michael said, and I could hear the pride in his voice. "She got straight A's this semester. She's working part-time at an accounting firm. She says she wants to learn the value of money before inheriting yours." He laughed, not bitterly but sincerely. "She's exactly like you, Mom. Determined, business-minded." "And Emma?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. Michael sighed. "Emma's working at a small architecture firm. She lives in a modest apartment, drives a used car. She looks real for the first time in years. But she's angry. Angry at you, at me, at the world." "Angry? Why?" "Because she finally realized that all the important contacts she thought she had were actually your contacts, connections bought with your money. When the fancy dinners and expensive gifts ended, so did the fake friendships." He paused. "Adrian married an heiress 6 months after leaving her." I stood and walked to the terrace railing. The sun was setting, painting the lake gold. It was a sight I never grew tired of. "Michael," I asked softly, "why are you telling me all this?" "Because I want you to know your plan worked," he said. "You broke us to rebuild us. And even if Emma still doesn't understand, I do." His voice had grown firm. "I want you to know I'm learning to be a better man." "And Maria? How is she handling the divorce?" Michael chuckled bitterly. "Maria already has a new boyfriend, an older businessman who supports her, the same way I supported her with your money. Some people never learn." We fell silent for several minutes. I watched the sunset. He was probably staring into his cold coffee somewhere in a crowded cafe. "Mom," he said finally, his voice softer now, "there's something else I need to tell you." He took a deep breath. "On your 66th birthday, Julia asked why we didn't call to wish you happy birthday. I didn't know what to say. My birthday had passed quietly that year. Just me and Julia, who'd brought a homemade cake and a hand-drawn card. Had been perfect. I didn't need calls, Michael," I said. "Yes, you did, Mom," he said gently. "And we needed to make them. But we were too proud, too wounded in our egos to admit we missed you." There was a pause. "I missed you, not as an ATM but as my mother." I felt something warm on my cheeks and realized I was crying, not from sadness but from something far more complex. Maybe relief. Maybe hope. "What do you expect from this call, Michael?" I asked softly. "Nothing, Mom. Absolutely nothing. I just wanted you to know," he said, his voice breaking, "that the man you raised still exists, beneath all the garbage I piled on top of him." Another pause. "And I wanted you to know. I'm proud to be the son of Juliet Moore, the woman who built an empire with her own hands." I hung up and stood by the window, watching as the last light of day faded across the water. For the first time in 2 years, I felt something close to hope for my family. Maybe true love can't be bought with money, but sometimes it's found in the silence that remains after the money is gone.